Well, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for being here. We are very, very excited to be hosting Cass Sunstein for a talk about a Bill of Rights for animals, followed by a discussion, followed by a reception for those of you who are here in person. So my name is Jeff Sebo. I direct the NYU Center for Environmental and Animal Protection and Center for Mind, Ethics, and Policy, the latter of which is sponsoring this event. Also, a quick shout out to our co-sponsors at NYU Animal Studies, the Wild Animal Welfare Program, Center for Mind, Brain, and Consciousness, and Center for Bioethics. Thank you all for supporting this event and so many of our events, and to the rest of you for being here both in person and online. Before I introduce our speaker, just a quick note about how this session will go. After the introduction, Cass will give a talk for about half of the time, maybe a little bit more, telling us why there should be a Bill of Rights for animals, anything else he might have in mind. Then there will be a discussion where I will present questions to Cass from the online audience, and people here in person can present questions directly to him. So those of you who are watching online, feel free to enter questions and comments in the Q&A tab on Zoom, and I can take a look at that as I moderate the discussion. And then those of you who are here in person, be ready to raise your hand, and we can get to some of your questions and comments as well. So you can all be thinking about what you might want to say. Now, with that said, I can just go ahead and introduce our speaker. Of course, he needs no introduction, but for the sake of ceremony, we can go ahead and do it anyway. Cass R. Sunstein is the Robert Walmsley University Professor at Harvard. He is the founder and director of the program on behavioral economics and public policy at Harvard Law School. In 2018, he received the Holberg Prize from the government of Norway, sometimes described as the equivalent of the Nobel Prize for Law and the Humanities. In 2020, the World Health Organization appointed him as chair of its technical advisory group on behavioral insights and sciences for health. From 2009 to 2012, he was an administrator of the White House Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs, and after that, he served on the President's Review Board on Intelligence and Communications Technologies and on the Pentagon's Defense Innovation Board. Mr. Sunstein has advised officials at the United Nations, the European Commission, the World Bank, and many nations on issues of law and public policy. And I will add that he has for a long time been a leader on animal welfare as well, and particularly normalizing the idea of considering animal welfare in policy contexts, and has caught some heat for that, which he may or may not talk a little bit about. And I really, really admire and appreciate that thread of his work, along with many other threads of his work. And so we are very, very grateful both for your work in general and for your willingness to come spend the day with us. Thank you very much. And please welcome Cass Sunstein.
Okay, well, it's a thrill and an honor to be here with people whose work has been foundational to theory and practice all over the world. And it's also a thrill to get to be here because this is a topic which means a great deal to me personally, and which, for reasons I will get into briefly, I have been shutting myself up about until roughly now. I've written a little book for you. I have a big book that's coming, but for you there's a short book, and it starts with a preface, and then there's something on moral foundations, then there's something on 5 freedoms, then there's something on microphone correction. Maybe we don't have a chapter on that. Then there's something on the Bill of Rights, which is the central thesis here, and then there will be an epilogue. So preface first, then moral foundations, then 5 freedoms, then a Bill of Rights, and then an epilogue. I asked some of you just a few minutes ago whether I should start with a tale about my dogs, and the answer wasn't no. So I'm going to tell you a true story, which maybe helps found some of the theoretical claims you're about to hear. So once upon a time, this is a true story, there were 2 dogs, one named Snow, who is laconic and a Labrador Retriever, and extremely calm and relaxed, and relatively immobile, though a very gentle and calm soul. Then there's a brother of Snow named Finley, who is mischievous and athletic, and also a Labrador Retriever, and has a kind of devilish and adventurous attitude toward life. So these siblings could not be more different. One afternoon, Snow was not laconic. She was barking wildly, which is most uncharacteristic, and then hurling herself physically against a door in my first floor of where I live, which leads to outside the door into the backyard, hurling herself madly and repeatedly against the door, which this is not conventional for a dog, and the least conventional thing you could imagine for her, laconic, calm dog. We were wondering what was getting her so agitated. And as you looked out, we have a little swimming pool in our backyard. This is in a rural-ish area. And Finley, her brother, was trapped inside the pool and couldn't get out. He had somehow made his way into the pool, and he was there swimming back and forth, good swimmer, but a puppy and unable to find his way out, and starting to be desperately concerned that his life was at risk. No one saw this except yards, maybe 25 yards away. Snow saw it and hurled and came to his rescue. When Finley was saved by human beings who got him out, Snow was also no longer laconic, but was jumping up and down all over him in a way that was mimicking his standard behavior with her, but doing something which she's never done before or since. Okay, that's a tale about a non-human animal and what was inside her mind, and let's use the word heart. Here's a tale about a human animal, which is to continue the preface, and you're looking at the particular human animal I'm going to tell you a story about. So in 2009, a colleague of mine at the University of Chicago, who was a quite good law professor, very creative and dynamite in the classroom, got elected president, Barack Obama, and the question was which of his colleagues would come to Washington, and he decided that it might not be the worst idea to have me come. So he asked me to take a job as overseeing federal regulations, for which what was needed was, and I'm glad you're all sitting down because it's a terrifying word, Senate confirmation. I found the experience probably the most surprising experience of my life. I was said to be, and much of this is quotations, an animal rights zealot with a secret aim to push a radical animal rights agenda in the White House. I was described as a rabid supporter of animal rights who would issue regulations banning meat eating and forbidding hunting and fishing. According to one account, this is public, it is hard to imagine President Obama nominating a more dangerous candidate for regulatory czar than Cass Sunstein, in part because I am, quote, an animal rights radical. Responding to those claims, the very powerful Farm Animal Welfare Coalition, a coalition of 9 groups, including the American Farm Bureau Federation, wrote a letter expressing concern. And expressing concern is Washington speak for, you should vote against that crazy person. The talk show host Glenn Beck, whom I now listen to in the morning, do you know Glenn Beck? He doesn't seem like a very happy man, but he's talkative. He described me over 100 times as the most dangerous man in America, and more than once as the most evil. Mike Huckabee, who is now the U.S. ambassador to Israel and former Arkansas governor, one-time presidential candidate. Can you imagine watching national television and seeing someone of considerable prominence saying on it that it would be interesting to see the reaction that that boy would get if he visited South Arkansas on the opening day of deer season? So that was a threat. Wayne LaPierre, head of the National Rifle Association at the time, said Sunstein is a radical animal rights extremist who makes PETA look like cheerleaders with pooper scoopers. That was a little clever, but it also was threatening. A handwritten death threat arrived at my enlisted home address saying, quote, "You should withdraw your nomination. An armed individual knows where you live." A letter opposing me was signed by the Dallas Safari Club, the Fur Takers of America, Masters of Foxhounds Association of North America, the Mule Deer Foundation, the National Trappers Association, the Pope and Young Club. I didn't understand that very well. What is the Pope and Young Club? Maybe some of you know. It sounds kind of Catholic and youth-oriented, but I think it's not that. The Texas Wildlife Association and many others. Members of the agricultural community were alarmed. Senator Saxby Chambliss said that my views may someday lead to a farmer having to defend himself in court against a lawsuit filed on behalf of his chickens or pigs. Senator Chambliss wasn't wrong there. Senator Susan Collins was kind and gracious and voted for me, but expressed her concern about bizarre statements. Ultimately, I got through. The vote was 57-40. In a meeting in the Oval Office on the day, Rahm Emanuel, who was then Chief of Staff, exclaimed, and I can hear his kind of loud voice, "A landslide." What does one do after that experience? I did two things. The first thing I felt very committed to, which I was going to call up. This is a little inappropriate because you're not supposed to make calls if you're a government official unless you get authorization. But I was going to call up the person who hated me most and say to him, I'm in the job. If there's anything you ever want to talk about, my phone is available to you. Come to my office and let's talk. So I called him and said that. He was a leader of a sportsmen's association, and it was the oddest phone call you could imagine. I think he thought it was a prank call. But once it was clear that I wasn't joking, he was stunned, staggered that I called him. And I was unable to make human contact with him, which deeply disappointed me. Not in him, not in myself, just about the world, that I couldn't make a human connection. He said almost not a word on the call. And while I had said, come by if you're in Washington, call me if there's an issue you want to talk about, in 4 years, he never did that. Okay, that's the first thing I did. The second thing I did was after my government job, I went on a walkabout or a hiatus. I said almost nothing about the subject. I was in a kind of closet. I can't say that this was an act of bravery on my part. The scalding that I took publicly was left some reminders, and so there was years of silence. This is a kind of coming out party. So thank you for attending. Moral foundations. You all know, I bet, the most famous passage ever on animal rights, though I'm hopeful that some of you here, your passages will equal or exceed the passage I'm about to read. It comes from Jeremy Bentham. The day may come when the rest of the animal creation may acquire those rights which never could have been withholden from them, but by the hand of tyranny. It's noteworthy that Bentham uses the word rights because Bentham is famously right skeptical. It's about natural rights that he was skeptical, not about enforceable rights that would protect interests. A full-grown dog or horse is beyond comparison, a more rational, as well as a more conversable animal than an infant of a day, a week, or even a month. But suppose the case were otherwise, what would it avail? The question is not, can they reason, nor can they talk, but can they suffer? Now that's a good song, Bentham's song, and I'm going to sing it a bit, but there are better songs if we're thinking about rights for animals. To get clarity on the better songs, with your indulgence and patience, let's focus on the matter of suffering and pain. This past Sunday, Snow and Finley were agitated. They sat next to me, they pushed me, they nuzzled me as if something was wrong, and Finley, whom you now know a bit, barked a lot. When they do that, they're usually, do you know what word comes after usually for Labrador retrievers? Begins with H, hungry. So I fed them once, twice, 3 times. Good dog companion, or kind of overindulgent and not healthy. They remained agitated. Finally, it occurred to me, on most days, I take them for a long walk on the local trails, and on this Sunday, I just hadn't done that. They wanted a long walk. I gave them finally what they wanted, and they calmed down. Now, I hope you're thinking this is generalizable to non-human animals of multiple kinds, that there's an analog for them. You could say that Snow and Finley were suffering before the walk, but that wouldn't be an adequate account of what they were experiencing. Suffering isn't the right word. Snow and Finley wanted to have a good day, and for them, a day without a long walk would not be a good day. That's true for many non-human animals as well as for many people. A good day has a lot more in it than an absence of suffering. A good day might have in it the presence of suffering. A good day for a cat is different from a good day for an octopus, and a good day for a fish is different from a good day for a horse, and a good day for an elephant isn't the same as a good day for a dolphin. When Bentham says that suffering is the question, what does he mean exactly? Why is that the question? Consider this alternative. The question is not, can they reason, nor can they talk, nor can they suffer, nor are they similar to us, but can they have good lives? And what are good lives for them? That's a more open-ended question, isn't it? It's humbler. It loads no dice. It is also a kind of umbrella opening up a host of other questions: scientific, economic, psychological, philosophical, other. If we ask what is a good life for non-human animals, we should certainly seek to reduce suffering, but we might also want to promote, and certainly not to stifle, a range of other capacities on their part. Suppose that a powerful species from another world, the Benthamites, were put in charge of our planet. We only have one so far. Mars, maybe, not yet. Suppose the Benthamites were focused on reducing our suffering. If so, we wouldn't think they understood us at all. The what are good lives question for them is the right one, I suggest, and it is going to play a central role in determining a Bill of Rights. Let's note that for many questions involving non-human animals, we might be able to forge, with the good lives for them question in mind, an incompletely theorized agreement, an agreement on what is good or what is right, amidst disagreement or uncertainty about why it is good or it is right. The what are good lives question for them is meant to be a foundation for such an agreement. This incompletely theorized idea is a cousin to John Rawls's notion of an overlapping consensus, where Rawls thought we could get an overlapping consensus on certain political commitments amidst disagreement about whether we should be Kantians or utilitarians or start from a foundation of faith. What I'm suggesting is some concrete practices and some mid-level abstractions might be able to attract consensus for people who disagree on or are uncertain about the foundational issues. If this sounds a little hopeful or unrealistic, it's the experience of those who designed the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, written and adopted by the UN in the aftermath of World War II. Little story, shall I tell you? I discovered in my father's little box of precious things, letters he wrote in World War II. He was in the Philippines at risk of dying, but he got a furlough to San Francisco in the 1940s. And in one of his letters to my mother, there was an astonishing couple of paragraphs. He said, everyone's here. The British are here, the French are here, the Russians are here, and of course the Americans. They're talking about a new institution to stop wars. And then my not particularly religious dad wrote, let's pray that they accomplish something. Chills down the spine, yes, to see that from one's own parent in a period of his life that one knew nothing about. Okay, Jacques Maritain, who was involved in the Declaration of Human Rights, said, yes, we agree about the rights, but on condition that no one asks us why. According to Maritain, the only feasible goal was to produce agreement not on the basis of common speculative ideas, but on common practical ideas, not on the affirmation of one and the same conception of the world and of knowledge, but upon the affirmation of a single body of beliefs for guidance on action. Okay, people might believe that animals should have a right to what is a good life for them, without having clarity about the foundations of that right, or with different people having different conceptions of whether it's even possible to come up with a convincing foundation. Here's what I'm hoping, that we'll be able to find our way toward supporting a Bill of Rights for animals, even when we appear to disagree or do disagree on abstract matters, and even when we are not sure how to choose among theoretically ambitious understandings. We might be able to support a Bill of Rights for animals on condition that no one asks us why. And one thing I'm alert to here is my preface was not just meant as a kind of personal, nice to meet you. It was also intended as a signal for the experience in one or another form of approximately a zillion people all over the planet whose commitment to some understanding of animal welfare runs deep, but whose willingness to articulate that or even to focus on that is restrained by, if not anonymous death threats, by something which is something like a softer version. Franklin Delano Roosevelt wanted to give a great speech in the midst of World War II. He was determined to give a great speech. And he had fantastic speechwriters. And he didn't like what they produced. And he said, we need to have the equivalent of a drop mic moment. Mic drop moment. That's what we need. Come up with one. And he didn't like what they did. He couldn't stand it. It was all tedious. And he was very disappointed with the best speechwriters the United States could produce. So he sat back, Sam Rosenman, his lead speechwriter, reported, sat back in the Oval Office in his chair, closed his eyes for an uncomfortably long time, and then said the following words from the president's mouth to his speechwriters. He said, this is what I want to say. In the future days, we look forward to a world founded on 4 essential human freedoms. The first is freedom of speech and expression everywhere in the world. The second is freedom of every person to worship God in his own way everywhere in the world. The third is freedom from want, which translated into world terms means economic understandings which will assure to every nation a healthy peacetime life for its inhabitants everywhere in the world. The fourth is freedom from fear, which translated into world's terms means a worldwide reduction in armaments anywhere in the world. This is a basis for a kind of world attainable in our own time and generation. That's what Roosevelt said, off the cuff. His speechwriter said, okay, boss, you're pretty good. But then said, this everywhere in the world stuff, you gotta drop that. That's too much. And Roosevelt responded, the world's changing, and pretty soon Cape Town and Paris are gonna be really close to each other, and I'm gonna stick with everywhere in the world. Which of these fit non-human animals? The most obvious answer, and I really want to say this with, what's the right word, without ambivalence, are freedom from want and freedom from fear. And it might be in our country, thinking about human animals, freedom of fear has more salience now than it typically does. But for non-human animals all over the world, freedom from fear is not lived. And indeed, we can find both freedom from want and freedom from fear. And so now we're on to the chapter on the 5 freedoms in, guess what, the 5 freedoms, which originated in the mid-1960s, you might know about them, and which I strongly suspect owe their origin partly to Roosevelt's great speech. In 1965, there was a highly technical report. Some of you may know about it. It had a very thrillingly unforgettable title, so prepare to hear a title that you'll remember for the rest of your life. Report of the Technical Committee to inquire into the welfare of animals kept under intensive livestock husbandry systems. This is not a promising title for a World Historical Report. It was chaired by a professor named Roger Brambell, who detailed the appropriate treatment of animals thus kept. The report said animals should have a freedom to stand up, lie down, turn around, groom themselves, and stretch their limbs. Not a whole lot, but something. Those freedoms in short order were described as Brambell's 5 freedoms and became the basis for a more specific list. The United Kingdom created a Farm Animal Welfare Advisory Council to monitor livestock production sector, and while it didn't make the 5 freedoms real, it did announce them as freedoms. 1, freedom from hunger, thirst, and malnutrition. 2, freedom from discomfort and exposure. 3, freedom from pain, injury, and disease. 4, freedom to express normal behavior. And 5, freedom from fear and distress. So fear is right there. The 5 freedoms have sometimes been accompanied by, for the 5 provisions, a mildly awkward term, provisions, but it meant literally provision. You provide, understood as responses to potential infringements of each. So each has to be met with a corresponding grant, which ensures the freedoms will be enjoyed. Okay. If we're to have a Bill of Rights for animals, what it ought to include. Here's some glimpses from the US Constitution as a way of orienting us. The First Amendment, Congress shall make no law respecting an abridgment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble. Okay, let's pause over the flavor of that and whether it's adaptable in some sense to the case of non-human animals and our commitment to good lives for them. Second, and most mysteriously, it's almost like a puzzle or a chapter in Joyce's Finnegan's Wake, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. That's opaque, isn't it? What does it mean exactly? But there we are. Fifth Amendment, no person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime unless on presentment or indictment of a grand jury. That's really important. nor shall be compelled in any criminal case to be a witness against himself, nor, and here's the biggest one, be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Here's another opaque one, relevant, I think, to non-human animals. The enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. Okay, if we're going to move toward a Bill of Rights for animals, we should notice immediately that what you just heard is concrete enough to be understood and used by people. Yes? There's nothing utterly incomprehensible, but they also have a degree of abstraction and open-endedness and maybe a capacity for change over time. The freedom of speech has a meaning. It's not an ink blot, but you can't know from those words whether it includes libel, blasphemy, hate speech in the news these days, or obscenity. Whether the freedom of speech includes those things is, as they say, a matter of interpretation. You can't stare at the word due process clause, at the due process clause, and know the answers to every imaginable question. We have a sense of what they're generally aiming at without having clarity about what they concretely entail. For animals that aren't human beings, as well as for human beings, that's entirely fine, and it might be necessary. Okay, ready? Here's a proposed Bill of Rights for animals. Article 1. Non-human animals have a right to be free from human torture, cruelty, neglect, and abuse. That undergirds the foundation. That's a kind of Benthamite bow, because suffering is central there. 2, non-human animals have a right not to be subjected to unnecessary or unjustified scientific experimentation or medical testing. My expectation is that some of you think that's too bold, and some of you think that's too weak. A lot of work has to be done by unnecessary or unjustified, and we'll get there. Article 3, non-human animals have a right not to be deprived of food, water, and shelter. Article 4, non-human animals have a right not to be deprived of an environment conducive to their well-being. That's the most radical of the ones, and pause over its possible capaciousness and breadth. We'll get to that in a little more detail soon. And Article 5, sorry, Senator Collins, non-human animals have a right to legal representation to protect them against legal wrongs. Article 6, the enumeration in this Bill of Rights of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by or granted to non-human animals. So Article 6 is mimicking Article 9, Amendment 9 to the US Constitution, which is recognizing that the lists ought not to be understood as exhaustive, and others are retained or granted, retained today, granted soon to non-human animals. Okay, there's the list. It's a bit of a mouthful, and I'm going to revisit some of them to try to concretize. I hope you noticed immediately that the first 5, not including the non-disparagement one, are relational. That is, they constrain the relationship between non-human animals and human beings. That's what they're doing. Yes? That's clear. It will also be noticed that some of the rights are not a right to something, but a right to not to be deprived of something or not to be subjected to something. The reason for this formulation is a judgment that the focus should be, for these purposes, on what human beings do to non-human animals, not on rights that non-human animals have to things in the abstract. So this is a relational set of guarantees. If the judgment I just stated is correct, that this should be a relational set of rights, then it's important to say, and some of you will be disturbed by this, some of you will be relieved by this, non-human animals in the wild do have an assortment of rights. So those philosophers who've argued for that set of rights are accommodated and agreed with by this formulation. Human beings are not allowed to be cruel or abusive to non-human animals in the wild. Human beings are not allowed to deprive non-human animals in the wild of food and water, or otherwise to deprive them of an environment conducive to their well-being. Does that impose restrictions on certain kinds of development projects? As they say, that's a matter of interpretation, but as the right is written, it is naturally so understood. If, for example, a project leads to habitat destruction and thus deprives non-human animals of the requisite environment, it would run into serious trouble. If we're depriving primates, for example, of a habitat that they need, that's a violation of the right. At the same time, we should note that all of the rights might be subject to arguments that there's a sufficient justification. The government is permitted to impose time, place, and manner restrictions on speech. And I hope Attorney General of the United States, you're listening. Are you online? Okay. Thank you for your service. If speech would create a clear and present danger of imminent lawless action, it might be punished, not otherwise. Under the proposed Bill of Rights, non-human animals are not given a right to food, water, and shelter in the wild. That's not a freestanding right to resources, and they are not given a right to an environment conducive to their well-being in the wild. It's human compromising of that's the problem. Is that a mistake? Maybe. The first and simplest reason for the caution I'm showing here involves feasibility. Human beings lack the capacity or resources to create rights conducive to well-being for non-human animals in the wild. If we did, or if we could costlessly vindicate that right by pushing a button broadly, should we? Why not? There may be no answer to that. It's possible that if every non-human animal were given rights consistent with the bill that I've laid out, we would produce ecological terribleness. So I suggest we do best to focus on human action that deprives non-human animals of the rights reflected in the list. The broadest of the rights, and my favorite, and probably the most contestable, is 4. I'm not looking and seeing everyone immediately remembers what 4 is. Even I don't remember what 4 is. Okay, but I have notes. 4 is non-human animals have a right not to be deprived of an environment conducive to their well-being. And I should acknowledge in saying this, I'm influenced by people in this room who've spoken broadly, at least so I understand them in those terms. Some people might reject that formulation because of its breadth and vagueness. No Bill of Rights for human beings gives a right of that kind to human beings. That is a fair question. The reason for its breadth is a judgment that the previous rights involving no abuse, no neglect, food and water and shelter just aren't enough. If non-human animals are deprived of an opportunity to run and explore, or their equivalent, given what kinds of creatures they are not given an environment conducive to their well-being. And that has humility in it. It cuts across a wide range of different creatures, and it says they have rights too that are commensurate with the lives of which they are capable. It might be objected that under the experimentation medical testing provision, there's no flat ban. To see why there's no flat ban, imagine an experiment designed to measure the cognitive capacities of horses. Imagine, too, that the experiment is a form of play. Imagine that horses enjoy and benefit from the experiment. Why should it be banned? Or imagine an experiment like those done by one of my heroes, Brian Hare at Duke, on dogs, designed to see how they respond to human pointing. You know about these experiments? The idea is that if I pointed there, it happened for one of you, you started to look. That's what human beings do. If you point there to a wolf, the wolf won't look there. The wolf isn't going to think there's something there they're pointing to. The wolf will look at the hand. If you point like that to the dog, will see there's pointing. What should I should look at? I did this. If you don't believe Professor Hare, believe me. I did this with my dogs. I do it all the time, and they don't hate it. They think they're a little bored by me. They think that I don't have a very fun game, but they know what to do. And that is a demonstration that domesticated creatures, bonobos, human beings, dogs, are able to follow that kind of signal as non-domesticated animals, hare urges, typically don't. The only point is that these experiments are not harming the animals in any way. Experiments that don't involve physical invasion might be acceptable. Experiments that do involve physical invasion might be acceptable. It all depends on what kind of effects they have on the relevant creatures. A large negative effect would need a very large justification. Should I confess that I asked Grok to produce a Bill of Rights for animals in preparation for this talk, and it was both less expensive and more expensive than mine. It took a harder line on scientific experiments than I did, so maybe that's a point for Grok. I have a friend named Grok. Okay, it's a large language model, as most of you probably know. The right to legal representation states very plainly that animals have a right to legal help. It's true that there's a limited number of lawyers there. There's an unlimited number of violations of existing legal rights that non-human animals enjoy. And like human beings, there should be a presumptive right, subject to available resources, to legal assistance. Does the proposed Bill of Rights forbid the raising of non-human animals for food? Not in plain terms. It does forbid cruelty, abuse, and neglect. If animal agriculture involves any of these, it is forbidden. We could imagine an interpretation of the Bill of Rights that would severely constrain the raising of non-human animals for food, and that is the natural interpretation. Does the proposed Bill of Rights forbid hunting? Can I tell you a story? I'm going to go into some detail because I feel I'm getting to know you, and there's some technical stuff here. So this is a kind of good story. Before I became a bureaucrat, I spoke at a very large conference at Harvard on animal rights and animal welfare. And I remember entering the door, and I thought there would be 6 people there, and there were hundreds of people. It was massive. And the people were incredible in their moral commitments and their focus. And I gave oral remarks in which I departed from my prepared text to say, because of the occasion and the both emotional and intellectual energy of the audience, I said hunting should be banned. That is what created all the horror of the confirmation, much of the horror of the confirmation process. That was findable online, my saying that, and the White House was very unhappy. So the person who ran the conference was Christine Korsgaard, a very distinguished Kantian philosopher, and I wrote her a note saying, this is causing terrible trouble. Is there any chance you could take it down? Can you imagine how she would respond to that? How a Kantian would respond to that? Not, yes, good idea, but instead, okay. Okay, so there's that. Does the proposed Bill of Rights forbid hunting? It's clear it's written in a way that doesn't foreclose a variety of views about hunting, but it takes a pretty hard line, putting a very strong burden of justification. Okay, a weaker Bill of Rights is easier to imagine, and so is a tougher one. A better one is surely imaginable. I'm submitting this for your consideration. It would be good, and it is really urgent, for some proposed Bill of Rights to become the law of the land or the law of a land in the near future. How about tomorrow? I promised or threatened you with an epilogue. And here's the epilogue. You've heard the chapters.
One animal?
We'll get there. We'll get there. You need to hear the epilogue first. Twilight Zone was an old TV show. You know the TV show Twilight Zone? And it was known for its twist endings. There's an episode from 1960 called People Are Alike All Over. Here's the narration from the narrator. You're looking at a species of flimsy little two-legged animals with extremely small heads, whose name is man. Warren Markison, age 35, Samuel Conrad, age 31. They're taking a highway into space. Their destination is Mars, and we're going to land there with them. The astronauts leave Earth for Mars, indeed, where they hope to find life, maybe even human life. Markison, remember Markison from the narrator, insists to Conrad that people are alike all over. And by people, Markison means to include humanoids, even if they turn out to appear on Mars. So Markison is an optimist, saying we will encounter people, and people are alike all over. Don't worry. They crash, of course. Markison is killed. Conrad's the only survivor. And on Mars, he indeed discovers human beings who seem warm and friendly and concerned with his comfort. After his Martian hosts escort him, Conrad, to his new home, he learns he can't get out. He's a caged exhibit in an alien zoo. In front of his door, a sign reads, "Earth creature in his native habitat." Conrad grips the bars of his cage and shouts out, Markison, his dead colleague, "Markison, you were right. You were right. People are alike. People are alike everywhere." That's haunting, chills down the Stein stuff, where Markison's meant to strike a note of optimism, and Conrad turns his phrase upside down. In their mistreatment of animals, people are indeed alike everywhere. And yet, and here's my effort to do a twist on the twist ending, people are alike all over. People also love animals, treat them with kindness and generosity, take them into their families, care for them through resources or words every day of every year. The human capacity for empathy and identification, exemplified and signaled by that very episode, as well as by Snow's response to Finley's distress and the distress of animals all over the world, to the distress of human beings, as well as other animals, has spurred movements of multiple sorts for the prevention of cruelty, for the reduction of suffering, for animal rights, and for efforts to ensure good lives for creatures, whatever good lives for those creatures have the form of. With your help, we're going to see much more of that, and we're going to see it sooner, not later. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that wonderful talk. We now have time for conversation, both with people in here and people online. I see some questions are already coming in online, but I know Ned has a question, and so how about we go to Ned for the first question, and then I can read one from people online.
Yeah, so you said you were going to talk about which animals, but you didn't. So the Bill of Rights you suggest sounds nuts as applied to, like, say, one-celled animals. So you might want to say something about that.
I'm agnostic on the coverage question. And if I said which animals, I lied. I'm really sorry. There's a book just out from Jeff that gets into this question about scope, which is right on my suitcase or near my suitcase or hiding in my suitcase. So I would say any animal that's capable of a good life would be the animal to which the Bill of Rights would apply. And that would go beyond suffering. If an animal is like a rock in terms of its lived experience, then it wouldn't be able to have the protection of the Bill of Rights.
So I would say mammals, birds, reptiles, amphibians, fishes, cephalopod mollusks, decapod crustaceans, insects, maybe the microbes. We can figure that out another day. That does raise another question, though, about the weight of rights. If we allow that such a large number, such a wide range of animals at least might merit rights in virtue of their sentience or agency or life or a realistic possibility of having those capacities, how do we navigate tensions between the elephants and the ants? Do we give more weight to the rights of an individual elephant than to the rights of an individual ant, or do we give them equal weight?
Okay. I think we need concretely to know what's the contest between, let's say, the elephant and the rat. So if there's a policy which would save a certain number of elephants, I would follow the view that we would want to know how much welfare elephants are able to enjoy and how that compares with a rat. So when there's research, it's early, but it's extremely suggestive, that tries to make progress on that question. So and I say this with fear and trembling because I'm not sure it's right. I have some deontological intuitions that are in part of my brain fighting against my welfarist, my dominant welfarist brain. But if a elephant is able to enjoy, a fantastic life over a large number of years, and a rat is allowed by nature to enjoy a pretty good life for a short number of years, then more resources to protect the elephant than the rat. But I'm not confident about that. If there's a contest where the welfare is stamping on the rat, either because the elephant wants to get to some place and the rat's in the way, then it would be best if the elephant didn't stamp on the rat. But this all seems to be happening outside of human control. And the Bill of Rights is meant to be relational. So what's happening out there, that would be a second order question, I think, for a Bill of Rights. Important, but second order.
So a question from the audience now, and then the next one from in the room. Jamie from online asks, why not an integrated Bill of Rights for all sentient or otherwise morally significant beings, including humans and other animals, as opposed to a separate human and animal one? Is that a compromise for the sake of practicality, or is there a principled reason for that?
It's a great question, and I hadn't thought of that. I struggle with the question whether non-human animals should have freedom of speech. So on one view, and this is probably a conventional view, but though maybe in this audience this won't be widely or universally held, that's a preposterous idea because animals don't speak. I've learned from some of you and also from life that to say that is too simple a rebuttal. But what would a right to freedom of speech mean for animals? Now, it might mean something, but at least it would be cashed out, so to speak, differently for mice than for people. So I love the question. I'm thinking that it might be a Bill of Rights for horses would look different from a Bill of Rights for primates. But I like the idea of a general one, and this is compromising not with practicality, but with it's a little bit of a rule standards debate. Have standards like this that cut across seems a better step forward than to say, here's a Bill of Rights for dogs, here's one for horses, here's one for chimpanzees.
Yes.
Thank you. A very excellent talk and great idea. I could echo some of the similar sentiments that I think the diversity of animal kind it becomes a very salient issue here. Now, in particular, since you mentioned the relationality aspect of it, almost all of it is framed in terms of the relational sort of human, non-human boundary. To what extent do you think it matters that that the language we use in the framing of it and discussing it is kind of scientifically accurate? Because is the language of it more for human consumption, for kind of democratic sort of participation? Does it matter if it's fully scientific? If it gets like gets like treating animals better?
I mean, if something in the proposed bill is scientifically reckless or false, that would be a problem. So the idea non-human animals have a right not to be subjected to unnecessary or unjustified scientific experimentation or medical testing. I'm hopeful that that's not scientifically erroneous. The idea non-human animals have a right to be free from human torture, cruelty, neglect, and abuse, that might have to be scientifically specified, what counts as cruelty, but it wouldn't be scientifically erroneous. And the hope is that both of those provisions, the scientific one is cautious, mind you. There's a lot loaded in the word unjustified, and if you hate that, notice that unreasonable searches and seizures is in the U.S. Constitution, and it works out pretty well. So unjustified might be best understood to mean almost all. Or it might mean that what Brian Hare is doing at Duke is completely fine because it has a justification and there's relatively little harm. So the claim is the diversity of species would, he said hopefully, not be a problem for the 6 enumerated items, and that there wouldn't be anything scientifically false. I mean, the idea that my favorite, non-human animals have a right not to be deprived of an environment conducive to their well-being, that would need scientific help to specify what it means. But that's not the first time the legal system has needed scientific help.
So we have a question online from Andy Stawaz, who has also done really great work on considering animal welfare and benefit cost analysis. He congratulates you on a great talk, and he asks whether your constraint on our duties to wild animals is really all that much of a constraint in the Anthropocene in a world reshaped by human activity. It might, yes, be limited to what humans do to other animals, but since humanity is now reshaping the planet, not only through deforestation and development, but also through climate change and acidifying oceans and pollution, biodiversity loss, is there really realistically a limit to this duty? And if not, how would you approach that?
I appreciate that. And when I was in law school, Andy was my professor, so thank you, Andy. Might have been the other way around, but these things are very complicated. So Andy, thank you for that. The scope of the relational Bill of Rights with respect to the constraints it imposes on human beings is very wide. So Andy's right on that. That climate change policy would have to be inflected by adverse effects that human beings impose on non-human animals. And I have a co-author in the room who wrote a paper with me on this back in roughly 1902, though he has remained very young throughout. So climate change in animals, I'm not sure we got the numbers right, but we said that the adverse effects that human beings impose on non-human animals are part of the negative impacts that human beings are responsible for and needs to be counted. So absolutely. All I'd say is there are a lot of things happening in nature that human beings are not responsible for. We shouldn't say that those things are normatively fine. And I worry a little bit about the normativizing of what happens in nature if creatures are hurt or tortured, et cetera, but whether a Bill of Rights should impose affirmative obligations on people to prevent that raises questions to which I lack answers.
Okay, let's go to this side of the room
Thank you for your talk. I really like the idea of having the Bill of Rights be relational. And I'm wondering if that means that animals with which we have stronger relationships, we have stronger rights and duties towards, and animals with which we have weaker relationships, we have weaker rights and duties towards, like my pet, maybe I have more rights, and then maybe something else I have less duties.
Thank you for that, and thank you for the kind words. Many people in this room, I bet, have close relationships, in present or past, with non-human animals. And there are other non-human animals which they haven't and which they don't want to have close relationships with. It might be they're scared of them, it might be they're disgusted with them and by them. And I would say relational would not justify drawing that distinction. So if people in Canada love horses but don't care about cows, they have an affective relationship with horses but not cows, that wouldn't warrant a distinction. So the Bill of Rights isn't relational in that sense. And it's a little like, okay, so there's a fantastic philosopher named Bernard Williams who was extremely agile, and also, I never met him, but people said he was scary smart. And he has one paper on non-human animals, and it's kind of in the direction of what you're saying, but it's more extreme. It says that we have affective connections with one another, and we're allowed to take our own side. So he says if it's aliens versus us, we take our side, or if it's us versus non-human animals, we can take our side. And that, a lot of people act that way, and some people have an intuition to that effect. But Professor Williams, that's not the level of argumentation which you were famous for. It's more just an assertion of loyalty. And that's, so I would say that relational in the sense of we care about or connect with, that would not have moral weight.
We have a question online from Samuel who wants to put pressure on the pluralistic foundation for your Bill of Rights and notes that many of the causes of harm other than suffering that you mention do have a negative valence. So boredom and anxiety and other states do count as negatively valence conscious states and can be incorporated into a hedonistic utilitarian way of thinking about who matters and why they matter. So are you really allowing for different ways of mattering, or are you pointing to different ways in which a being could have positive or negative experiential states? And more generally, we might ask, how pluralistic do you want to be? Do you want to include all beings who are agentic, can pursue goals, all beings who are alive have certain types of survival and reproductive functions, even if we know for a fact that it feels like nothing to be them?
Okay, so these are great questions. The pluralism of the incompletely theorized agreement is that you can be in favor of the Bill of Rights just as you can be in favor of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights from diverse foundations. And I'm hopeful that people who are deontologists and followers of Kant can say, this is my song you're singing with the Bill of Rights, and that utilitarians could say the same thing. And the ones I like better, who are the kind of neo-Aristotelians who think about capabilities rather than about utility, that they would be on board too. So it's pluralistic in that sense. Non-human animals have a right not to be deprived of an environment conducive to their well-being is the most Aristotelian. The utilitarians, I think, could be good with that, though they'd want to understand well-being in terms of utility. And that itself can be specified in different ways. The pluralism with respect to the diversity of creatures, I think that's what the question is also getting at. And that I'm more being agnostic on than insistent about. So if a creature is capable of a good life, I say, it is entitled to the bill. If it's a creature that's it has a capacity for agency, but it doesn't have any affective association with the deprivation of agency, then no. So suppose you have a creature, I don't know that there are any such creatures, but a creature who wants to chew this. It's a very odd thing to want to chew, but let's suppose there's a creature who wants to chew this because that seems like the thing to do. The word want is ambiguous here. Is seeking to chew this, and deprived of the ability to choose this is seeking other ways to chew this. If there's no affect associated with it, if it's really like an automaton, then it wouldn't count.
Okay, so to put this in philosophical language, you do take sentience, the ability to experience positively and negatively valenced states, as a basis or a requirement for welfare and moral standing, legal standing in your Bill of Rights. But when a being is sentient, you then want to be pluralistic about or agnostic about what counts as having a good life, what the correct theory of welfare or well-being is, whether this is hedonistic or desire satisfaction or Aristotelian flourishing. Is that about right?
Yeah, and if I had to say, I'd say it's Aristotelian, and what's a good life for an octopus is different from what's a good life for a chimpanzee. And
Nice.
That's the root.
Hi, thank you so much. So I'm going to assume there's a difference between moral communities and political communities, and that there are different properties that could occur in those two kinds of communities. In thinking about the Bill of Rights, so our Bill of Rights, that sort of defines the relation between the state and the people. And I'm wondering, it seemed like the relata on your proposed animal Bill of Rights were between human beings on one side and the relevant non-human animals on the other. And so is this bringing animals into a political community, or is it sort of describing the rules of the moral community?
Okay, so I'll tell you why I'm smiling. John Rawls, great philosopher, had a footnote which he never published, which is in manuscripts, and he says, we post a signpost, no deep thinking here, things are bad enough already. And so in some respects, this does put animals in the political community. Non-human animals are being given rights, but they're already there. Not as much as the Bill of Rights would put them there, but there are rights that federal and state law give non-human animals. So they're already parts of the political community in that sense. So we would have to have a definition of political community that would tell us whether this Bill of Rights puts them there or puts them more there.
We will go with one more in the room right there and then move on to the reception.
This is violating my rights as speaker. Not to continue. Continuing is requisite.
In a world where artificial intelligence is more and more prominent, shouldn't the bill talk about artificial intelligence and its relation to animals, with the thought that in the future AI is going to act like an agent and humans are not going to be part of any operations? So that could be a way, to bypass this law. And we're not doing it, it's the AI who's doing it, and we're not actually sure what the AI is doing.
That's great. So if you have a creation of human beings, Dr. Doom, who's a character in Fantastic Four, and kind of machine kind of person, but let's suppose Dr. Doom is all machine and doing terrible things. If it's a construct of human beings, then human beings would be rights violators. So if AI is designed in such a way as to violate, then human beings have an obligation to fix it.
All right. Great. Well, thank you so much, everybody. Obviously, a lot more to discuss, but we do have this space for a while longer with beer and wine and seltzer and snacks over there for those of you who are here in person. So let me just say, by way of closing, thanks again to everybody for being here, both in person and online. Thanks, of course, to the hosts and sponsors, and again, the host being the Center for Mind, Ethics, and Policy, but then also Animal Studies, Wild Animal Welfare, Mind, Brain, and Consciousness, Bioethics. Thank you all for supporting the event. And Audrey is somewhere. Thank you for making this event happen and shifting the room when the other one was double booked. Sophia as well, the AV team, and Cass especially for working on animal welfare over the years, representing animals in the halls of government. I hope that the next confirmation battle, while worse because of what you said here today, is ultimately successful and you can represent animals in the government someday. All right, thanks again, everybody, and let's hang out.
Thanks. Thanks, guys.